ahead, go ahead and open up your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I'm going to read these last few verses of chapter 11 from last week because chapter 11 and chapter 12 really go together, and I'm going to try to hurry as much as I can so that I don't waste all my time in the first three verses and then we have to hurry. But at the end of chapter 11, just to give you an idea, Paul, at his own behest, at his own aggravation, is having to basically list his qualifications of being an apostle to the church at Corinth. There had been other men who had come in, and by way of fancy words and titles, and to put it in modern terms, they came in with doctorate degrees and high education diplomas and that kind of thing. And basically, listen to us, we're more educated, we're smarter, we're more intelligent, we know what it says in the Greek, that kind of thing, which they all spoke Greek back then, but anyway. So Paul, like I say, he's almost frustrated to have to do this because Paul spent a year and a half with these people, won a great deal of them to Christ for him, by himself, but those that were with him as well, Apollos and different ones. And then even after that, he sent Titus and others back to try to keep them educated and try to keep them up on everything. Remember, these were brand new Christians. This is a brand new concept. In our day, at least in America, and that's we have to be careful sometimes getting into a microcosm of our area, but in this day and time, Christianity, at least for most people in America, is not a totally new concept. It's almost like, you just go pick which flavor you want and you go to that one. And I don't have time to keep me focused here, okay? But, I've heard so many people say, well, I really like that guy. I like his style. I like his message. It made me feel good, Well, good for you, but if it's not the truth, it doesn't matter. This is not, God didn't set this up so that, you pick how you want God to be, and then once you decide how you want God to be and what you like and don't like about the way God is, then you can change Him to be whatever you want to be. God is God. He set this thing up. He owns it. He rules it. It's His. It belongs to Him, and so do you. And we need to get on board and find out what it is God expects out of us. And especially once we come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, what does He expect out of His children? You're in the family if you're saved. You're a child of God. He expects certain things. If you have children, do you expect certain things out of them? Yeah. Okay? He expects certain things out of us as His children. Now, He loves us. He will not forsake us. He told us that. If you're His child, you're His child. You might be an embarrassment and you might make Him mad a lot of times, but you're still His child. I might make Him mad and embarrass Him a lot of times, but I'm still His child. And He will not ever not count me as His child, and I'm thankful for that. But that kind of love from a parent, good behavior in the heart and the life of a child. We don't do what we do to try to make God happy with us or to try to make God love us. God already loves us. We should act and live the way He wants us to live because He loves us and because we love Him and want to please Him. And so, but Paul's having to state his qualifications here. So y'all got me off track again. And it's aggravating to him. So he finishes up. He's going through this whole list. And Paul says, now they're glorying and they're talking about their degrees and their diplomas and their education and how smart they are and the big words that they can use and how much knowledge they have and how much they have learned in their lifetime and how they're qualified and I'm not. Paul rather glories, he says, in his infirmities. When Paul lists his qualifications for being an apostle and his qualifications for being a minister of Christ, he doesn't talk about how many degrees he's got. He doesn't talk about how smart he is. He talks about how much pain, how much aggravation, how much imprisonment, all the things that he's gone through, and he didn't quit. He said that's the signs of an apostle and a disciple of Jesus Christ. Doesn't matter what you know, doesn't matter how smart you are, how many qualifications you've got. You're shown to be true when persecution comes, when trials come, and you stick with God rather than walking away. That's the marks of a true Christian, and that's the marks of a true disciple, and in this period, a true apostle. And so he's listing these, and that's why I say we're just setting the tone, because it's a carryover into chapter 12 of what he's doing here. And in verse 28, this is the last few verses of chapter 11, he says, beside those things that are without, and he's just listed all of those things, the persecutions, the imprisonments, the beatings that he received, being stoned to death. He says, besides all of that that's without, that's coming from the outside. He says, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. The whole church world at that time looked to Paul kind of as its foundation. A lot of the disciples had already been killed at this time. Peter was still there and a few of the others. But Paul was kind of the one that had taken the lion's share of the load on his shoulders for carrying the gospel at this time. He says, the care of all the churches. Verse 29, who is weak and I am not weak? Who is offended and I burn not? If I must needs glory, the things which concern my infirmities, the things that ail me, the things that are a hindrance and a hurt to me. Verse 31, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, know that I lie not. Everything that Paul's saying that has happened to him and it has gone on, it has in fact happened and it has in fact gone on. He goes on to say, and this is the end of the chapter, in Damascus, the governor under Aretas the king kept the city of the Damascenes with a garrison, desires to apprehend me. So again, this is just another occasion where somebody was trying to arrest and imprison Paul. And through a window in a basket was I let down by the wall and escaped his hands. Probably wanted to eventually kill Paul there because of the different problems that they looked at Christians as a blame, as a way to blame things. That's what Rome did. That's the reason that they burned Christians. Most any society, just before Christians are persecuted and killed, they start blaming them for the problems in their society. Does that sound familiar at all to the things that we see going on around us today?
Definitely getting closer.
Well, that's the point. Just understand. I forget who it was that said those that burn books will soon burn people. They said that just before World War II about the Germans. They began to burn all the works of the Jewish people and the different things, and it wasn't long before they burned the Jews themselves. They're trying to burn your book in figurative sense more so now than literal, but it's coming. Just be understanding of the fact that it is in fact coming. We've had it really good for a really long time here, but it will come to an end. Now whether it's in our lifetime or not, I don't know. I'm just saying it's going to come to an end. Persecution will fall on the church again at some point in time. But Paul here, he says, and I escaped his hand. So he's again listing all of these things that happened to him. And he's going to continue that into chapter 12 now as we carry over. I'll let y'all start reading verses 1 and 2 here in chapter 12.
It is not expedient for me, doubtless, to glory. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord.
I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. God knoweth. Such an one called up to the third heaven.
Okay, now, chapter 12 again, and this is still by way of introduction, so we see how this covering all of chapter 12 is going. It is not expedient for me. Paul said, this is not really what I want to be my message. This is not beneficial to me to tell you these things. He says, you're forcing me to have to do this. You won't listen to me, and you won't trust me. Even though I'm the one that brought the gospel to you in the first place, I'm the one that stayed with you, I'm the one that didn't take anything of you when I was there. And he says, it's not expedient for me to I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. And now, the experience that Paul is fixing to list, most people that study the Bible And I tend to agree with them, though I wouldn't be dogmatic about it. The next 8 or 10 verses, Paul covers an experience where basically someone was allowed to see things in heaven, the third heaven. This is the only mention of this third heaven in the whole entire Bible. And most people that study the Bible, and I would say I would fall under that category, think that Paul is talking about an experience that he had himself, and he's talking about it in the third person. But it fits with Paul's life, and if you look at the wording and the way he goes about it, it makes sense to me that it's Paul talking about something that happened to himself, and that the reason he's talking about it in the third person is because it didn't happen to him in the flesh. It happened in a spiritual sense, and he is saying, in a spiritual sense, this happened to me, not in so much in a fleshly sense that I would glory in the flesh. It's not about the flesh. And so, again, like I say, I'm not going to be dogmatic. If you got a different opinion, I'll be happy to entertain it. But he says here, I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago. So this experience happened 14 years previous, at least, that we know. And of course, by this time, Paul's been in the ministry longer than that. And most people that study the Bible can't prove this, but think that probably when this happened to Paul was when he was in fact stoned to death outside of Lystra. And so he said, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth. Such a one is called up to the third heaven. And of course, we're going to find out that this third heaven is obviously where what we tend to think of as heaven, meaning where God's throne is, where people go when they die, that kind of thing. That's the third heaven. If you go back, and again, I'm trying to hurry. If you go back to the book of Genesis, and only the King James Bible that I think is the correct version for the English-speaking people to use, only it in Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the heaven, singular, and the earth. And that word heaven means the expanded place, space. Now later he divides heaven, meaning the earth's atmosphere. That's one heaven in the Bible. It says the birds fly through the open firmament of heaven. Well, where do the birds fly? Through the atmosphere. Okay. And then there's a second heaven. It talks about where the stars and the moons and the planets, those kind of things, what we would know as outer space. And then again, this is the only mention I know of the third heaven. And this apparently is where God, the angels, that kind of thing reside. And so he says, such a one is called up to the third heaven. He continues on that line of thought. 3 and 4.
And I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell, God knoweth.
How that he was called up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter.
Okay. And again, this there's not a lot I can say about this verse other than whatever he saw. He couldn't talk about it and he couldn't explain it. Okay? And this is not specific only to this. There were many times in the Bible where people were allowed to be at least in the presence of the glory of God, and they can't describe it. And it's kind of like we joke and have fun a lot of times about the fact that I can't see color. But if you think along those lines, okay, because people ask me all the time, they're like, well, what does blue look like to you? Well, how do I explain that when I don't know what blue looks like to you? Okay, and it's the same thing as trying to take somebody who has been blind from birth and explain to them what yellow looks like, or explain to them what a tree looks like, or anything. How could you ever do that? The ability of that person to comprehend, because they don't function in that dimension. Just like when we, or whoever this was, in the natural body or in the spirit, see things in heaven and then try to translate it back into a language that those of us who only know this world can understand. how can you explain an all-powerful, almighty, eternal God to beings that are mortal and carnal and have a time placed on everything that they do? How can you explain somebody who lives outside of the confines of time, space, and matter, when all we do is live inside of the confines of time, space, and matter? You can't do that. You don't have the ability to explain that. And so he says he caught up in a paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter. And of course, these verses are the ones that people single in on, and they're like, so what do you think he saw? He just said he couldn't explain it. So, it's like, you'd be surprised how many people ask it out of the book of Revelation, where the angel told John, don't write that down in the book. It's not for man to know at this time. First question everybody asks, what do you think he wrote down?
And when we study,
Yeah.
I'm dying to know.
I know. Well, I don't know, And so, but this is one of those cases. And so he says, which is not lawful for man to utter. I can't explain what Paul saw. Paul couldn't explain what Paul saw. It's too wonderful, too magnificent, and too far beyond human comprehension to even understand. He continues.
Of such in one will I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but in my infirmities.
For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth, but now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth me to be.
And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure.
Okay, and these are the verses that lend me and so many others to think that Paul is in fact talking about himself here. And if you catch the way he's saying it here, of such a one will I glory. And again, I think Paul is separating here the spiritual and the carnal. And he says, I'm not glorying in the flesh over the fact that I got to see these things. He says, yet of myself I will not glory. And again, I think he's separating the flesh right there. He says, but in my infirmities. Glorying in the fact that I've had these revelations and that I've seen these things. I'll glory in the fact that I've had hurt, I've had harm, I've had heartache, I've had disaster, catastrophe, all of these things. He said, I'll glory that I've been counted worthy of that, and that'll be my marks of being a true disciple, follower, and apostle. He says, for though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool. He said, in my flesh, I would like to, but he said that would be foolish of me to glory. And he says, for I will say the truth, but now I forbear, lest any man think of me above that which he seeth me to be. And again, I think Paul's referencing the fact that this was in fact him, but he's separating it out. And he says, lest any man think above me that which or heareth of me. And he said, lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations. And Paul said it's not about the fact that I want y'all to exalt me in the flesh. And in fact, at other times, Paul would say, when they would say, well, I'm of Paul or I'm of Apollos, and they would be prideful of that. He says, who is Paul and who is Apollos except ministers by which you believed? He says, there's no glory in me. I'm a man. There were even places where the people with Peter and some of the others, Paul, at times, people would run up to him and bow down, and they'd be like, oh, and Paul would say, get up. Peter would say, get up. You don't have to bow down in front of me. There's nothing special about me. And he says, through the abundance of the revelation. And again, I think Paul's saying here, and he was. Paul wrote half of the New Testament. He was given direct revelation from God as an apostle. And he says, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. Now, there has been so much speculation over the years as to what this was for the Apostle Paul. Some have said his eyesight, some have said it was, other things.
It says
yeah, it's pretty easy to determine what it was. Okay? It says, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. What's the next phrase?
The messenger of Satan.
Okay, so what was Paul's thorn in the flesh?
The messenger of Satan.
The messenger of Satan. It's done right there. You don't have to wonder. Okay? Now, did Paul struggle with his eyesight? Probably so. In one of his letters, he said, see how large a letter I've written unto you with mine own hand. Some people think that Paul's eyesight failed him as he got older. Probably the result of being stoned to death. You get hit in the head enough times with big rocks, it tends to affect your vision somewhat. And it says, lest I should be exalted above measure. I think every day, all the time, the messenger of Satan was there. Paul says to buffet me. Buffet means to strike with a hand, like what we would call punch. And what that messenger of Satan had to say, I don't know. Maybe it was a reminder constantly in Paul's mind of what he used to do. You know, maybe he saw himself standing there holding the coats while they stoned Stephen to death. And as Acts put it, then Paul was consenting unto his death. Paul didn't throw a rock, but he stood there and said, "Yeah, y'all go ahead. I'm with you on this one." I don't know. I don't know what the message was, but I know what the thorn in the flesh was. It was the messenger of Satan. Paul had his own personal messenger from Satan assigned to try to deter him and distract him from what he was doing. He said, lest I should be exalted above measure. Paul said, it keeps me humble. And it is a good thing in our lives to remember who we are and what we are. I think a lot of times in our churches today, Christians to the fact of who we really are and who God really is. It's where that attitude of, well, I wouldn't like them for being here, or I don't really want them to. Who are you? Special? Last time I checked, I'm just as much of a sinner and just as much of a horrible person as anybody else. And it is only, and I don't know how to put it any more emphatically, it is only Jesus Christ that changed my heart and my life. It's not because I tried to do better, it's not because I willed it to be so, it's not because I fixed my life up. Understand, it only comes from Christ. I can't take credit for any of it. And the guy sleeping under the bridge in downtown Atlanta right now is no less than I am. I am blessed and I am the recipient of more grace and more mercy than you can imagine. And I don't deserve heaven not one bit more than he does. It is all by grace. And so Paul says here, lest I should be exalted above measure. Paul says, I need to remember where I came from. I need to remember who I was. How wicked and how much of a sinner I was. We should dwell on that every once in a while. And he says, I'm going to read a few to try to cover a little bit more. He says, for this thing, for having this messenger of Satan to buffet me, he said, I besought the Lord thrice, 3 times, that it might depart from me. And this is the way so many times God answers prayer. We say, God, I want. God says, well, here's what you're going to get. Okay? And it's really true. And this is the best way it works. A lot of times people will say, God, I want patience. And of course, some preachers will tell you, well, you shouldn't pray for patience because by tribulation worketh patience. And I get it, but you know what? We need some patience. Okay? But people say, God, just give me patience. As if God's just going to dump patience into you, and you're all of a sudden going to become this incredibly patient person. Is that how God works? No. What does God do when you ask for patience? He puts you into situation after situation after situation that requires patience. It's a test. You want patience? Demonstrate patience. Here's a tough situation. Have patience in it. You pray for faith. Does God just dump faith into you? No. He puts you into situations that try your faith. That's how He answers prayer. Paul here says, God, just take this away. I can do better without it. God says, no, you can do better by relying on me. Because it's not really about you anyway, Paul. He said, I besought the Lord 3 times, thrice, that it would depart from me. Instead, God said, my grace is sufficient for thee. God said, Paul, I know you'd like it gone, but just trust and rely on me. You're a better man for having it. He said, and for my strength is made perfect in weakness. As long as you think you got it under control and you got it handled and you don't need any help, God will let you drive.
It was a big mistake.
Well, I mean, again, we put ourselves in charge of our lives. And then, now think about this. Think about the insanity of this. But this is the human condition. We put ourselves in charge of our life, our destiny, our career path, our goals, our choices, all of these. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. We're going to do. I'm going to do. We're going to, you fill in the blank. And then, when things go wrong, who do we blame? God. We say, God, do you want me to have the Lexus or the Audi? God may be saying, I don't want you to have either one of them, but that's not how we're praying. God, do you want me to have this guy or that guy? And God's like, neither one of them guys. Or girls, flip it around the other way. You fill in the blank, whatever it is. God, do you want me to go on with this job or this job? Maybe it's neither one. See, we've already made the choice in our mind. We just want a little confirmation that we're doing it like we ought to. But he says, my strength is made perfect in weakness. He says, most gladly, therefore, I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul said, I would rather glory in the things that have been done and the things that I've had that hurt me. I'd rather be humble. I'd rather be meek. I'd rather be quiet. I'd rather be agreeable and have the power of God. What is having the relationship and the power of God in your life worth to you? Because you cannot have it and sin. You want the power of God in your life? You want to know? So many Christians this day and time say, I just wish I knew what God's will was in my life. You know why you don't know what God's will is in your life? Because you don't have a relationship with Him to where you would know what it was. God's will is not revealed by writing in the sky or clouds that shape an arrow pointing you in the right direction or anything. God's will in your life is right here. I'm holding it in my hands right now. You do what the book says to do, and you don't do what the book says not to do. It's not hard. And you'll find God's will for your life. It's not magic. But most of us don't really care what God's will for our life is. We set about to do what we're going to do, how we want to do it, and the way we want to do it. And if God agrees or disagrees, we're okay with it either way. And again, then we wonder why things never go like we want them to go. You can't fight. I want to feel the power of God in my life. I want Him to use my life. That's what Paul's saying here. He says, therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. Now, this is not some sadistic or crazy, goofy thing. Paul's just simply saying here, I'm okay with it. I can rest in knowing that I receive the infirmities and the hurts and the persecutions that I have because I'm doing what's right. A clear heart and a clear conscience is worth way more than safety, than houses and land and possessions, than any of that, than material comfort. The peace of God in your heart is worth more than all of that. And he reproaches and necessities and persecution and distresses for Christ's sake. All of this, he says, for when I am weak, then am I strong. Now that sounds like an oxymoron, but the truth of the matter is, Paul's saying here, if I'm weak in the flesh, if I allow the flesh to be suppressed, if I allow God to have His will and His way in my life, I'm stronger with God than I can ever be on my own. I mean, I get the mentality sometimes we want to pick up a sword like Peter and fight the enemy. It's not how we win. We don't win by fighting. We win by telling people the truth and preaching the gospel. And that's a tough thing to do then, and it's a tough thing to do in this world now. He goes on. I'm going to try to finish the last few verses here. He says, I am become a fool in glorying. He says, this is foolish. And again, like I said last week, Paul, at his behest, is doing this. He says, I became a fool in glory. And he says, ye have compelled me. He says, you've forced me, you've compelled me to do this. He says, for I ought to have been commended of you. That's strong wording now. Think about this. Paul says, I ought to have been commended of you. Instead, I was questioned. Instead, I was put under scrutiny and given the once-over because you acted like I was here for some ulterior motive. He says, for in nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles, though I be nothing. Again, Paul here, in the flesh, he's again saying, I'm nothing. He says, verse 12, truly the signs of an apostle were wrought among you in all patience, and signs and wonders and mighty deeds. And so Paul here is saying, while I was with you, I proved to you 100% that I was a true apostle of Jesus Christ. He said, in all of these things, in patience, and signs, and wonders, mighty deeds, he says, for what is it wherein you were inferior to other churches, except it be that I myself was not burdensome to you? Paul's asking him a question here. He says, are you any different? Did I act like you were inferior to anyone else? Paul again here reiterates the fact, he said, remember, I didn't burden you with anything. Paul didn't even take anything from them when he was there because he didn't want anybody to say that they had been the reason that he had been furthered and he had been helped. He said, I was careful. He said, forgive me this wrong, and he's being sarcastic here. But he goes on to say, he says, behold, the third time I am ready to come to you. I will not be burdensome to you. He said, this will be the third. He said, and all three times, he said, I don't plan on this time, and I didn't the last two times become a burden to you. He says, for I seek not yours. And this right here is the marks of a true disciple, a true preacher, a true teacher. He says, for I seek not yours, but you. He says, I came for you. He says, I didn't want your stuff. I didn't want your things. And again, remember, he's countering what these other false teachers and preachers who have come in and decided that the people needed to pay them and to give their stuff to them and that kind of thing. And I would somewhat liken it to the prosperity gospel in America. He said, I didn't come to get stuff from you. I came for you. He says, for the children, this is just a principle. It's laid out in the Old Testament. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. He says, and I will very gladly spend and be spent for you. That sound like Joel Osteen? No, not so much. Does that sound like any of those? He says, I'll give it all. I'd rather give it all. I'd rather spend it all on you. And he said, and be spent of myself. This last phrase, and this is where I'll have to stop. Now catch this. He says, I will very gladly. He said, I did it. I'll do it again. I was happy to do it. I'm still happy to do it. He said, I'll spend and be spent for you. He says, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I be loved. That's hurtful right there. Paul says, it seems like the more I care and the more I try, the less that I'm loved of you. And I'll be honest, this is a true statement. The more concern and the more care and the more passion that you dump into your work for the Lord, the more a lot of people will push you away. Because at the end of the day, some people don't want to be hurt by the truth. And in reality, the truth hurts. People do not like to be told that they're sinners. They don't like to be told that they're wrong. They don't like to be told that they're wicked and they're out of the will of God. But that's the truth and the message that people need to hear the most. This modern day, you're okay. God loves you just the way you are. You can't come to God and keep your sin too. He will, listen to me, that's a lie. God will not accept you with your sin if you plan on carrying it with you. You have got to come to the point in your life to where you're willing and ready to forsake it. Now, I'm not talking about cleaning your life up so that you can come to God, but you've got to bring it to Him. And you've got to realize that it's your sin, your problem. You're the one that is sending you to hell. You've got to see that. You've got to understand just how wicked and just how vile your and my heart truly is. The people that think that they're making it because they did something good or that they do something, I don't understand it. They're not making it. It will not happen for them. You've got to realize and you've got to come to Him and be broken and be hurt. The gospel message is good news, but it's only good news to those that understand and see their need for it. That's salvation. It's not a say these words and you get out of this hell, because God's mean and He wants to send you there. No. You deserve there. You're sending yourself there. God offered you a way of escaping there because of what you did. You're going there because of you. He's willing to offer you salvation because of what He did. That's where your faith has to be placed. We have to come to that realization. I have to quit there. I thank y'all for being here.